Hi, I'm Irina Serdyukovskaya, and this is SEO in 2024.
Irina, what's your number one SEO tip for 2024?
My number one SEO tip is to learn analytics to analyze better your user behavior and conversions.
Okay, so what aspects of analytics do SEOs have to master?
I think there is two things. The first part is to understand the implementation of the analytics, because when we work with the websites as an SEO, usually we are not responsible for implementation of analytics, but we are responsible for the results from the analytics, and we need the numbers which can prove that we are doing the right thing and we are bringing conversions, users, and etc. So I think the first thing is that to invest, to understand that analytics is correctly implemented on the website and you have the data which you can use to back up your actions and investment. And the second thing, for sure, to understand how to read this data. And in most of the cases now it's Google Analytics 4, but it can be something else like Pivik, Matomo, or some other tools, which are kind of different, but the goal of all of them is to understand how to actually, you can prove that you are doing the right thing, that SEO is bringing good users, which are converting, which are engaging with the content and the website. And it's super important for us and as an SEO to understand what reports we can use, what metrics we can use, what dimensions, and how to actually visualize this data to show yourself and the client or in-house that SEO bringing results which are expected from this channel.
So let's get first steps right to begin with. So you mentioned implementation. So what does an SEO need to do to ensure that the analytics has been implemented correctly, and maybe compare GA4 with the previous version?
I would say the first thing is that we need to be sure that it's implemented and collecting the traffic. So the easiest thing is to go to Google Analytics for real time and to check that you are visible in the real time reporting. And it's not double counting, for example, so you don't have double data, or some of the pages sometimes are missing. So it's nice to click through the website, for example, especially if it's different CMSs, for example, it's might be the WordPress is implemented for the blog, and for the main website you have some custom CMS. So just clicking through the website and to see, okay, I can see myself, data is collected, there is no duplication. And the second thing, if you are a little bit more techy, you can use Google Tag Manager also to analyze a little bit more of what data you can collect in GA4 using the implementation. So you can collect, for example, more information about specific category, how the specific category of the blog is performing, or specific category of e-commerce website. So you can implement some additional tracking, which can prove that what you are doing with the content side, for example, or maybe you're improving some technical SEO, you can use this data to actually to show results.
You mentioned tracking blog content and how you can track specifically how that content, and you also talked about additional tracking that you can set up. Can you talk a little bit about the additional tracking that you have to set up there?
Additional tracking, it's possible to set up, for example, the tracking for specific category pages. So if you are writing blog, for example, and you have different categories, I don't know, it's health, it's sport, and it's some lifestyle, for example, if you are doing the blog for the company. And you can implement the tracking, so you can then see data specifically for the health categories, specifically for the sports, for example, and specifically for the lifestyle. And you can analyze what content you can produce more, because, for example, I don't know, sport is in the rise and it's much more engaging versus, for example, health. And usually you can do this either using URL, the category, if you have category in the URL structure. But if you don't have this in the URL structure, you still can collect this data using Google Tag Manager from the website code. And you can use this actually to build a report specifically for this category.
Do you think that an SEO should try and use a GA4 specialist consultant to get things set up properly to begin with, and then perhaps run it themselves after that?
Yeah, I think that either having some of the courses online, because there are a lot of courses already there, which are paid.
Well, what course do you prefer or recommend?
There is one which created by the colleague, he's Kyle. I can then share the link somewhere if we can. So he prepared the digital marketing course specifically for digital marketers, where he explaining all the details about how you can use Google Analytics, how you can use reporting, etc. Or other thing is to have personal coaching with Google Analytics specialists who can actually answer your questions specifically for your website, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. For example, you can collect some data, but you may be thinking, oh, it's not possible with Google Analytics, for example. So it's nice, additional to having the course, always to have some Q&A with specialists to ask, okay, I would like to have this data. Is it possible? How we can visualize this? This will help you a lot, because you will have much more data you can play with. And if the website is not changing a lot, it's one-time thing. So you're doing this setup for example, for 1 year. It's one-time investment, and then you can use this for your analysis for 1 year and maybe review this one time per year if there are some changes on the website.
Now, you also mentioned Piwik and Matomo. What are the pros and cons between using GA4 and an alternative analytics software package?
The first is for sure the cookies, because in Europe it's a little bit tricky still with Google Analytics 4, because it's collecting some data, it's storing data or sending the data in USA. And comparing to, for example, Piwik or Matomo, they are not storing the data in USA. So you're storing this data on your own cloud, for example. So it's possible for the client. So this is the huge difference. Some companies, especially I think big companies, they could not use Google Analytics, so they could not use all the functionality. Another thing is for sure Google Analytics 4 is free tool, and Piwik and Matomo you need to invest a little bit depending on how many metrics and dimensions you need to collect, how much data. But the huge pro, for example, for the Piwik is that it's much easier. So, for example, for small businesses, it's sometimes easier to pay, I don't know, I think it's something like 15 euros per month to have this clear data versus to learn how to use Google Analytics, because Google Analytics 4 especially is a little bit more advanced tool. So you need to understand it better. So you need, for example, the course, you need to hire somebody who understands it versus, for example, Piwik. Very, very clean, very, very straightforward for the small businesses. Even if you're paying to see the data you need, and you don't need to any customization, which offers by GE4, but maybe you don't need them.
I'm trying to have a look at the pricing for Piwik actually, but I can't see on their website. It just talks about core plan and enterprise plan. Obviously, they have a free plan as well. But is there a significant advantage to paying for a plan on their platform?
I would say that what I have heard from clients, that because the data is very, very clean for them and easy to understand, that's why they are actually paying, and because of the cookies. So there are two things which are beneficial for them. And I would say that's mostly at all. So it's also some of the preferences, because a lot of people are just, I don't want to learn Google Analytics 4, for example. So I will move for some other tools, for example. So it's kind of, and also because when Google Analytics 4 was introduced, and still now, there are some bugs. So people are like complaining a lot about some bugs, or some reporting is not working. So they are also checking what else is on the market. And before, when we get used to Universal Analytics, there were not this huge question, maybe I should choose for something else, even if it's paid tool.
And one advantage with GA4 is the content consumption analysis and user funnels. So how does that work inside GA4?
So in GA4, what I really like and what I think the huge advantage of GA4, that it's highly customizable. So you can build the analytics you actually need for each of the projects. So it's not something which is stand in the stone, because in Universal Analytics, we could not customize that much. And for example, you can build the funnel for the B2B. So you can see the funnel, how the people are moving from, visiting your blog page to actually making inquiry or login or signing up for the free trial. So you can build this funnel using the free form in exploration section. and it's quite intuitive. So I would say that when I show this to the clients, they are like, it's quite easy to do. So it's not complex thing, and it's super easy to visualize. And it's also very flexible. And the same with the content. So sometimes some of the things which we get used to do in Google Sheets, for example, in Looker Studio, now you can do already inside GA4, also using freeform. So you can build something like the table of the analysis, and you don't need any third-party tool, which is also really, really nice.
I was going to ask you about Looker Studio, actually. You mentioned it there as well, but you also said that sometimes you won't need to use that as much. So that's interesting. So, I mean, ideally, do you prefer analyzing your data in Looker Studio or an alternative? Because obviously with Looker, you can take data from other sources as well.
Yeah, this is the huge advantage. So if you need to combine the data from, Google Search Console, for example, or from search metrics, SEMrush, keyword tracking, for sure, it does make sense to connect this in the Looker Studio, everything. But the nice thing is if you need some quick analysis, you don't need to build Looker Studio table. So you can do this inside GA4 and then already visualize on the monthly basis what you need to check and to show your stakeholders.
So it feels like with GA4, we've seen a big earthquake with regards to analytics and what we need to do and how it works. Is it going to be fairly static now? Is GA4 going to evolve much? Is much going to change about the way that analytics is done over the next few years?
Yeah, I think that they are preparing for a lot of changes, especially for cookies-less future. So they are trying to already incorporate IE there. So it can predict if, for example, I, as a user, decide that I don't want to be tracked. GA4 already can predict if the conversion came from me. It can be counted as a conversion based on the prediction that the users will actually convert doing this, but this data wouldn't be recorded. So I think this is the huge difference, and this is why they actually introduced this. And I think they even pushed this a little bit earlier than it's kind of public ready. So a little bit earlier than maybe they would do this in other circumstances, because they are preparing that otherwise maybe they will be out of market. And they need this data as a Google, because they need clients actually to use Google Analytics, because they need this data to be collected, I think, for the internal usage. So it's not about the money directly because it's free, but it's about the data they have access to and the market.
Okay, so an SEO just needs to continue to embrace change with analytics.
Yeah, I think embrace change and also use these as an opportunity to invest into analytics, because I think what I see a lot with the clients, that we get used how universal analytics worked. And usually some of the reports were created like 5 years ago, 7 years ago. Nobody knows what all of these dimensions means. So this is good thing where you are pushed to learn the new tool, and you are pushed to invest into this in terms of money, in terms of time. So I think this is good, but yeah, it's painful, especially when it's not your priority, because as an SEO, it's not your priority. When I worked as a SEO with retainer clients, it's not your priority to learn GA4. Your priority is, to do keyword research or to have content strategy or fix some technical issues. And this is something kind of side thing. But on other hand, this helps you to understand better what actually you're achieving as an SEO.
So GA4 is forced medicine for SEOs. It's good for you, honestly.
Yeah, it's good. But you need to get used to this, because, for example, when I started, I was like, I don't understand anything on of this, because it's very, very different from universal analytics. But when you get used and when you understand how you can play with this, just give you some time, and some of the SEOs already like it because of the flexibility.
If an SEO is struggling for time, what should they stop doing right now so they can spend more time focusing on analytics in 2024?
I think that as an SEO, we are focusing a lot on content creation and new content strategies for the new years and etc. And I think that we already produced a lot of content in the internet. So using the time, learning analytics and learning the content, how it's already performing on the internet. This is, I think, the combination you can use. So maybe it's not, you would not provide the content plan with, 100 new articles. Maybe you would find that you need to improve 50 articles on the page. And this is where you can invest your time improving content and using data and using Google Analytics to understand that actually you need to do this.
Irina Serdyukovskaya is an analytics consultant, and you can find her over at irinakudrys.com. Irina, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2024.
Thank you a lot for inviting me.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2024, the book, over at seoin2024.com.